Hi, it's Toy Soldiers here again. This time we're talking about designing an attack lineup for your deck. This is just going to be a basic introduction for those of you who just don't really know where to begin or where to start when designing an attack lineup. You're just kind of getting into UFS. This will just be a good primer for you. Just some very simple steps to kind of go over to check to make sure that you're not clogging yourself up too much. I'm going to use that Bomb Man deck that I've been using for the past few videos. I'm just going to go over why I picked the cards I did pick and kind of the simple steps I went through to get there. So the first thing you're going to want to do when you're designing attack lineups, you want to look at your character and come up with a design intent for your attack lineup, or I guess you kind of want to figure out what angle you want to approach the deck with. So like that could be anything. You could be like, I want to play a bunch of really low difficulty attacks, just a whole bunch of them, or I want to play just less but just giant number attacks, or I want to play lots of stun attacks, or I just want to do like beatdown, or I want to do, I don't know, turn 2 aggro, or I want to do like late game control, reversals, whatever. Sky's the limit when it comes to your strategic intent for the deck. But for me, it was Bomb Man. His first form says discard 2 cards. Your unblocked face-up attacks get +3 damage for the rest of this turn. So obviously the first thing I wanted to do was put card draw into my deck and my attack lineup so that when I get to the late game, I can just use that card draw on top of the card draw within my own deck to kind of build a hand mass that I can use to fuel that form to get it up to as much damage as I can, so that those tail end attacks that sneak through are just doing monstrous amounts of damage to end the game. His enhance says, if your attack is partially blocked, your opponent destroys one of their foundations. So the other part that I wanted to add into my attack lineup is I wanted to create situations where my opponent was kind of in a lose-lose situation. So I wanted to put them into a place where no matter what they picked, I had options that could benefit me and that I could kind of steer my turn based on how they reacted to certain attacks. So that was kind of my intention with this. And so going into it, I picked all attacks that kind of featured those two things. So Hyper Bomb, obviously, conditional card draw on the beginning of it. If it's not blocked, I draw a card. And then it's also got Stun 2 and Destruction on it. And then paired with Bomb Man's Destruction ability, it creates a good situation where either I'm baiting out a block right off the hop with a stun, and if not, I get a draw card. So what's not to love about that? It made a card like Magnet Missile, which is an automatic shoe-in, just because if it deals damage, I get to draw a card. So if they partial block it at all, I draw a card and they destroy a foundation. If they just eat it, they're eating tons of damage. And then if they do full block it, my next lower mid attack gets +3 damage. It's an incredible attack for this specific lineup. It fills the intention of my deck perfectly. Just love the card, even though it's a 2-check. I was still running 4. It's just amazing. Then I also decided to pick Psychic Upper, because it does have a conditional card draw on it. It's got powerful, so I can push a little bit of extra damage on it coming into the late game. It's not quite as versatile as the other two, but it does give me a little bit of information about my opponent's hand, so I can be like, hey, do I want to push more low attacks? Do I want to push more high attacks? Especially if it's the last card in their hand. Psychic Upper is a good card to throw out just so I can see what that last card is before going into the rest of my turn. So Psychic Upper is really good for that sort of thing. Then Magnet Pull was another great card for the lose-lose situation for my opponent. It's the only mid I'm running, and for good reason, because of the 2 abilities on it. If they do fully block it, I get a target commit one of their foundations, and my next high or low gets +2 to the control check to play. So it's just a great card. It's also really good to play at the end of a long string once I do know that I can land an attack and get that big damage pump off Bomb Man. And then I picked 3 Leaf Shields, just to operate as a good tail ender, similar to the way that Magnet Pull did, but then again, it is that breaker, kind of block all wall that's just fantastic to have in your deck. So, how I kind of went through and picked all those cards, like I said, picked my strategic intent, went through, found cards that could fill that strategic intent the best that I could possibly find. But on top of that, you need to then, after you pick a whole bunch of cards, let's say you even go through and you find like 25 cards, or way more than the attacks you actually need. The next step to do, once you've kind of picked all the different cards that can fulfill your strategy, you need to then go through, relook at all the attacks that you've picked, and kind of realistically gauge what you can play in a turn. So for me, I am running a lot more attacks. I do want to be seeing those attacks when I do draw into them. But I do want to be keeping my attack difficulty pretty low, because I might end up seeing a lot of attacks in my hand naturally just on my regular draw, and I want to be able to play those attacks out and not end up being clogged with 6 difficulty attacks or multiple 5 difficulty attacks that I won't be able to play without totally committing out my board and kind of overextending. So when I was going back through all my different attack line choices, that's why I end up only going with 4 or 5 difficulty attacks. 8 4 difficulty attacks, and I put a little bit more weight onto the 3 difficulty attacks, just because I knew that if I was going to try to push larger strings near the end of the game, I was going to want it to be a little bit more weighted towards the easier to play attacks, especially because I can get the pump off bomb man anyways, so I wasn't too concerned about getting large numbers on things. Whereas if you're playing a character that can't get larger numbers on things, then you're going to need to start looking at, you know, how can I get more damage into my attacks? Maybe you do need to start running attacks that pump themselves a little bit more. Maybe you need to start running a higher difficulty attack count, and then putting things into your main board, into your foundations that are going to help you play those cards a little bit easier. There's just tons of things to reconsider when you're kind of doing this phase, and it's a really difficult thing to try and explain, but just to summarize it all, it's just to go back through, look at everything, and try to realistically adjust what can be played and what you need to play, right? Like, if you don't have the damage within your attack lineup to actually kill somebody, then that's actually an issue. You can't fully rely on your foundations. You can't fully rely on even your character. Your attacks almost need to stand on their own, because characters can be committed, your foundations can be knocked out by your opponent as well. You just need to be able to get what you need to get out of your attacks for the game win. And if you can't get that just out of your attacks, then you probably need to readjust things again. Like, I can't stress this enough, just realistically looking at things. Like, this attack lineup's great because I can easily go from Hyper Bomb into any 4, and then I can play a Psychic by only committing 1 because it's on difficulty 6, and then throwing a 3 after that, and only having to commit 1 on that one too if I manage to check 5s. Right? Like, it's just, I can play 4 attacks in this deck and still get pretty good results. Or you can play the 5, then go into your Magnet Pull, and if they end up having to full block it because you've been forming, then you can start throwing the other cards afterwards, and then you can throw another tail end after that, right? Because this, ideally, if they block the Magnet Pull, that'd be 5, 5, 5. This will come in at 5 as well, and then you're only playing this one on the 7 difficulty. But again, if you manage to form out on this thing in the late game, you can still get that pretty good tail damage off. And that's sort of, you know, designing in a nutshell. The one last thing that you want to do with your attack lineup, when you've finally gone through and be like, okay, I have enough damage on board that I think I can kill people. Okay, I've managed to get the cards that fulfill my strategic intent pretty well, and they complement my character, they complement cards in my deck are complementing my attack, my attacks chain into each other really well, the effects kind of complement each other again, you know, this one gets blocked, this one gets more damage, great, everything's working together really, really well. Now the last thing that you want to do, and this is pretty much always the last thing that I do, is I go back through and I look at my deck, I look at my character, and I look at my attacks, and I want to go through and say, where's my weakness? Where are my holes? What am I missing to make this deck complete? What am I going to be weak to? And in this deck, currently, one of the things that I was worried about was, because sometimes I might be put into a situation where my only way of killing someone's going to be late game with managing to get that form off and playing large strings. But if I can't set up my late game control, I might get killed to throw attacks, or I might get killed to people, you know, zone switching on me, or doing something weird, because I don't have the biggest hand size, and I am throwing cards away to try to get my effects. So that's where a card like Leaf Shield came in as being pretty important, because I did need a bit of a block all. And, you know, I couldn't just run 4 Magnet Pull. I couldn't run like a rapid Protobuster for the stun 2. I really needed to go for the Leaf Shield just because it covered bases that I was lacking in my deck. So that's kind of the last thing that you want to do. And that, well, and in the same note of that kind of thing, looking at your blocks, right? Like if the blocks are all really, you know, tilted to one side, like if you have tons of low blocks, or if you have way too many high blocks, or that kind of thing, then you may again need to go back through all your attacks and balance things out. That was another reason why Leaf Shield ended up being included into this deck, was because it helped balance blocks for me. It helped make sure that I had enough zone coverage. It helped make sure that I wasn't going to get abused by zone overload decks. Like, it's just, it filled a weakness in my deck, and that's why this thing ended up having to be in here. Because otherwise, I wouldn't want to play it. Otherwise, it'd be a sideboard card at best. But I can get the damage on it with Bomb Man. I can get the benefits out of it that I need. I can throw it at the tail for a lower difficulty, and it covers parts of my deck defensively that I need covered. So that's kind of, you know, attack design in a nutshell. If you want to see another video that's really good for kind of going over attack design, I would take a look at the J. Talbane Pauper deck that I did. The attacks that come in the J. Talbane starter are brilliant. They're really, really good. They were well designed. They come with a really good difficulty curve again, very similar to the one that's in this Bomb Man deck. And you can see in that video just how changing a few of the attacks really makes the whole thing synergize. It fits really well within the other cards of the deck. Just because I go over the foundations of that as well and talk about how they interact with the attacks, that's another great video to kind of go through and see, okay, I understand how attack interactions work with each other, with your character, and with your deck. So those are just things to look out for. So I hope this helps some people. I know it's really basic. It's not super rocket science. It's kind of aimed at the people that, you know, they're just green in the deck building. So I hope this helped, and until next time, this is Toy Soldier signing out.